All right, we're back for another episode of Speaking with Gravity, and I am Kervin, one of your hosts, and I have two other co-hosts.
What up, y'all? It's your girl D to the double E. Good morning.
Hey y'all, it's Taisha.
And on this podcast, we talk about mental health and how everything affects everything. As one of your hosts, I'm a son, a brother, a husband, a father, a friend who happens to be a therapist. When you sit with the therapist, the conversation is different. And with every episode, the goal of the conversation is to try to get you to think, make you feel, and ultimately make you do what's best for you. I'm a therapist, but this isn't therapy, it's a podcast. And before we get into our topic for today, we got a disclaimer.
While we serve as mental health professionals, the information and content being discussed during our podcast is not intended to be utilized or substituted as therapy. The purpose of this broadcasting is to share our personal perspectives through open dialogue about content based on our personal, educational, and professional experiences.
So today we're going to talk about communication, toxic communication in relationships, and it comes from the movie that came out a couple of weeks ago. Typically, when we get together, we talk about we plan out what we want to talk about. And when we were talking about communication, this movie came into play. Malcolm and Marie. It was a very, very hot topic at one time when it first came out. You want to just give us a little bit backdrop on that, D?
All right, so when you're talking about Malcolm and Marie, it basically is a romance drama directed by Sam Levinson, starring Zendaya Coleman, who plays Marie, and John David Washington, who plays Malcolm. And basically, the two are returning to their residence after the viewing of Malcolm's movie presentation, and so there's a lot of dialogue about the movie itself, and then the gratitude or lack thereof displayed from Malcolm towards Marie and through her eyes or through her perception. And so just a lot of communication and a lot of exposure of things that have happened during the duration of their relationship. So if you haven't had an opportunity to go check that out, definitely do so.
Man, that
Overall, I think it was a good movie.
I did not. I did not think it was a good movie because I was so frustrated watching it, and I heard a lot about it, and I wanted to watch it, and I had to watch it for this episode. But I was so frustrated because of them going back at each other. One of the things that I was trying to figure out was, did they actually love each other? Period. Like, I was trying to get to the bottom of that. I couldn't really figure that out. And I watched the movie really one time overall, but I would go back and look at like different scenes, and I just couldn't grasp whether they actually love each other. So from that standpoint, that's toxic. Anyway, like, why are y'all even together?
I think before we even get into, terms of if they love each other, I think they do love each other in my perception. I think it's often, what happens is sometimes we get dependent in relationships, and I think there was a strong dependency on both people's part, and that kind of led to a lot of the complications of their relationships. I didn't feel like they didn't love each other, but I think you can have love for a person but not be meant to be with that person. Or that was my perception.
I definitely felt like they tried to like balance each other out. They needed each other,
Right.
to some degree. Whether he needed her more than she needed him, I can't really say. I don't know.
I mean, she talks about it. She talks about like she feels like she is his movie, and so she becomes a part of his career, and ultimately, you know what I'm saying. She gives him, because he even says it, a clip in the movie, like the movie isn't about you, but you were an inspiration for it. So therefore, you know what I'm saying. She gives him purpose in creating this masterpiece of art that a lot of people are really proud of, that's getting him to the status that he's trying to achieve.
Yeah, but she wait until that day after the reward or after the premiere to say I was your inspiration. Like, you knew this all along, and you stayed all along. in the process of the movie being made. Why bring that part or that piece up now? You know, and saying that is like, what are you trying to do? What are you really trying to bring attention to? If we also saying that they're codependent, what is she bringing attention to in that moment, in that time when she says, "I'm your inspiration to this movie"? Is she taking away from his success? That's another thought that I had.
It's a complex. I mean, it's a complex film when you're actually looking at it from that perspective, because both of them are saying powerful things, but it's the timing in which they're saying it. I don't think that she was wrong for saying, that, she deserved recognition, seeing that she served an inspiration, or that without her vulnerability and without her life experiences, he would not have been able to captivate or express that movie in the way that he did. But I also think timing is everything. Like you said, the fact that, tonight of all nights is the night that you feel this, but as the movie progresses, you kind of see, kind of what happened. And I think part of the challenges is even going into kind of when it happens and what transpired, because in the movie, he talks about how, he recognizes his mistake early on. So as they're watching the premiere, he's asking her, "Are you okay?" You know what I'm saying? Or, he knows that he's messed up in his terminology. And then, she just is kind of like, I'm good. It's not a problem. It's not an issue. So then, of course, if you tell me you good, what is your response going to be? Okay. You know what I'm saying? Or if he's apologizing at that point in time, then the issue is, I'm assuming it's resolved, at that point. But then she goes on in the movie, you go on talking about it. She talks about how it wasn't until after the movie, when everybody else made it a problem, that it kind of like kept spiraling for her. And I think that's the detriment of that, is when you're in that public eye, or when your relationship is public, that people have the ability to sometimes maximize what you may be experiencing. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if it wasn't a problem for you in that spacing, but once somebody said, "Oh, well, it was a problem," but then somebody comes and add their 2 cents to it, now it's kind of like blowed up even more. But I think we even have to back it up. When we talking about, toxic communication, what is toxic though? When we're talking about that word, I mean, because that's a word that's kind of hot on the press right now. A lot of things are toxic. People are toxic. So what are we meaning when we say that? I think we kind of have to back it up just a little bit to explore that.
I like to give examples when I'm talking about something.
Okay.
Right? As opposed to just giving a concrete definition. I think you better at that than I am. But toxic, that moment that, going back to me saying, why did she bring up the fact that he used her for inspiration? In that, at some point, he started talking about everybody he had dated in the past. Right. This person contributed this person contributed that. To me, that is toxic. You can say in general, hey, you're not the only person that I encountered that had issues, and I drew upon that. But to go into detail, because he went into details, he called their names, he said what situation, what place they were in. You're going into graphic details about your past experiences. In any relationship that I've ever been in, I don't want to know the graphic details of what happened prior to me getting there. That's toxic. That's you don't need to know all that. The person that I'm dealing with don't need to know all of that, and I don't need to know all of that about the person that I'm dealing with.
So you don't feel like the pre-disclosure of past relationships is relevant to current relationships when you're dealing with people?
To some degree.
Okay.
You can pre-disclose, but you have to limit what it is that you're disclosing. Okay. People can take advantage of you if you give too much. Not only that, but people can put you in a box or define you based on what you say. If I've been with, call me, what's that guy named, Wilt Chamberlain. If I was Wilt Chamberlain and I've been with all of these people and I've got so many body counts on me, and I say that, even if I don't go into graphic detail, I got that number. Now this person is looking at me totally different. Now if I just minimize it and say, hey, I've been with, more than one person or a lot of people and just leave it at that, maybe I can get away with it. I probably wouldn't even have that conversation. That's one of those conversations I think you should not have. There are to me some conversations that you shouldn't have.
Okay.
At all. And then the way that they were going on this movie, they just kept going from place to place to place to place. They didn't even, to me, they stuck with one overall topic, I guess you can say, but they was just going all over the place and hitting each other below the belt time and time again. To me, that's toxic. Why are you intentionally trying to hurt somebody that you with? You love them. Yeah, that's why I say, how do I know that he loves her or she loves him if I'm trying to hurt you? If I love you, I am not going to intentionally hurt you repeatedly. Again and again. Even if I'm selfish, I'm not going to do that.
Okay. What's your thoughts, Ty?
You both have said a lot, so I don't want to repeat. But really, when you go back to asking what does toxic even mean, causing unpleasant feelings. You know, some actions that's harmful could be malicious. So some behaviors or actions that I feel were toxic in the movie. Curvin, you mentioned a lot too. I think it was the scene where they were in the bathroom. She was actually in the bathtub, and that's where she was expressing the inspiration for the movie, and that's where he indicated, no, other inspirations, you know, based off of past relationships helped me create this film. And just even bringing that back up, him verbally abusing her, and she was able to identify that as verbal abuse. Labeling, you know, bringing up her past traumas, I don't think was helpful. Did they love each other? I feel like it's kind of hard for me to say whether or not, because you have to look at it as what is love to them, what were they taught. So I feel like they were only exhibiting love from a place of just their own personal experiences, whether it was a lack of love, and so therefore they thought maybe doing other things to fill that void of whatever lack of love was. I don't know.
It's funny that you said that about what is love to them, because as a therapist, you always think about how did they view love prior to being in a relationship.
Absolutely. Right.
But even with like how they experience it with their mother, their father, I have a good idea of what I think love is based off of just looking at my parents. But then when you said that, I thought about something when you said he came to her while she was in the restroom. I mean, not the restroom, the bathroom. She was in the bathtub, right? As a therapist, and I have to be careful because I guess the climate that we're in is not the way it used to be. So when I think of a man, like I still get it. I ain't gonna say confused, but I still have my thoughts of what I was taught as a man in the 80s and the 90s, as opposed to it being kind of different now. But as a man, my original thought was, you are outside. You were walking. I think he was smoking. You were taking time away, and you brought Joe behind and tapped on the window to ask her a question. And even with her, she said, so out of all of that, you heard,
I'm mediocre.
am I mediocre? First of all, she had a point. I did not like this. This is where I felt like she kept it going. She could have just said, "Nah, I don't feel like you're mediocre," and then just leave it alone. But she said, I forgot what the statement was, but she left it open for interpretation again.
She just said, "That's not what I said."
That's not what I said. But she didn't actually answer the question, so it kept it going. But going back to him, why would you come from where you were? She's relaxing. She done stopped. And you tapping on the window to say, is that what you really mean?
I think when you're talking about, you know, their interaction again, kind of going with what Ty is, this, obviously, even looking at this movie, this wasn't the first time they've had these type of interactions.
Mm-hmm.
So it really seemed normal for them. It didn't seem outside of the norm of their communications. And so that's what I think, when we're talking about communication and why it's so significant when you're looking at it from a relationship standpoint, is because when you're experiencing something so much, you don't even recognize that it's dysfunctional, or that it's not conducive, or it's not producing what other people would say would be classified as normal, right?
No. Well, I ain't gonna say no. You said when you're in something so much you don't recognize it's dysfunctional. But if you have that ideal of what dysfunction is prior to you getting into it, you should know. It shouldn't take you that long.
You can't always assume that, though, because every experience with a person may be different, and people. You gotta, when you're looking at this mirror, they both know each other's vulnerable spots. And so if you're looking at how they were communicating, oftentimes, just like when we are communicating with our loved ones or someone else, when a person hits you at a place that you're very sensitive in, you're going to go into a state of defense. It doesn't matter how much you have had interaction. You're not going to come and say, man, that really hurt my feelings. You're going to go into defense mode. Now, what that defense may look like may be different. It may become avoidance, where you shut down, you don't want to talk. You may walk off, or you may become verbally aggressive. You may or you may start becoming attackful, right? You coming for me, let me come for you. And I'm not going to act like that isn't normal, because I think oftentimes when people don't really understand communication, that's a common response for a lot of people. And so I don't say that that it's justified, but what I am saying is it wasn't like it didn't make sense. I could see that. I could see how it kept going, but I think the issue in the communication practices and what we have to be mindful of when you're dealing with people, and I'm just not even talking about in an intimate relationship in which they were, you have to be very careful as to when and how we choose to communicate. Because I think Ty brought in some very significant contribution when she said Marie oftentimes in the movie indicated the verbal abuse. She indicated, hitting below the belt. She indicated the insults. She indicated that the conversation was not going to be productive. So she did have pre-insight of knowing what could possibly happen. However, again, just like you said, you left cliffhangers, right? Passive aggressive. So you knew exact. And again, when we're talking about toxic, that's what toxic is. When you do stuff, you know what I'm saying, passive aggressive. So I'm gonna say something, I'm just gonna drop a bomb and I'm gonna leave it there, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna initiate something, and you're gonna hit him where ultimately, based off of how the movie even starts, he's very career centered. That's something you automatically know just from the intro of that film. And a lot of people in general have a certain passion, whether that's career, whether that's their family, whether that's their music, whatever it is. And so oftentimes when that person you with, if you say something about them, you know what it's gonna do. So a lot of what she said was what she was feeling, but the way she went about it was she used his career to be tactful. So she never really in this movie addressed her issue with him directly, but I'm going to hit you with what I know you love and what you care about, and that's going to be your performance, your career, your movie, what I know that you have a passion for, what I know that you care about, what I know that you feel. And that's what a lot of times in relationships we see people doing. So I'm not going to tell you that I got a problem with you communicating with someone else. But if you come and ask me about something, or you come and ask me about your pet, I'm going to belittle it. So when you come and talk to me about you starting your business, I'm going to downplay it, right? I'm not going to say to you,
That's
what I'm
crazy.
saying, that it's a distraction to the relationship, but I'm going to make it to where, okay, so that's something you care about more than you care about me. Yeah, I'm going to put it in your mind that, you don't have the ability to be successful with it, or you can't really achieve that. And so, as I kept looking at that movie, that's what I'm seeing, is where she projected what she was feeling onto that, and he did the same thing. He projected the success of his movie and the dependency that he knew that she had and created for him, that he had created for her, it throughout him. Like, you mad at me, but you can't blame me because this been your problem. Like, this problem was before me. You know what I'm saying? So it's really about that. And again, when we're talking about what toxic is, that passive aggressiveness, that, what I'm saying, saying things intentionally to be hurtful. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what makes that relationship so toxic. And I think what you kind of threw me off is when I seen a lot of people saying, oh, this is our relationship all the time. Like,
All the
you know
time?
what I'm saying? And I'm like,
That's a problem.
that's a problem, and that's what I'm saying. And it's not even just how we, and like I said, interact with our spouse or our mate, but how we interact with people in general. You know what I'm saying? We got to be really attentive to, when we say stuff, because they both had valid points. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's when you chose to express those points that became critical.
Even with that, with what you're saying, I'm looking at a note that we had down here about active and reflective listening.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they were horrible. To me, they were horrible. Unless I missed something. Like, one person will say something and the other person would take it entirely different than what it was meant for, except for when they were hurting each other. Oh, they took that one all the way in. If it was meant to hurt you, they got it and they received it the way it was supposed to be given. Right? But when it was something else, they just didn't. They would listen, but they wouldn't process it right. And the other thing when you were talking, I was thinking about was going back to him saying all the people that he had met prior to her, right? They kind of had some similarities. So is this the type of female or person that you're looking for? Somebody who's going through struggles, somebody who's vulnerable, somebody who needs you? Is that what he attracted to? Or is that what he's choosing to put his energy into? And why is he choosing to put his energy into them? I guess to some degree, she got a point.
Exactly.
Maybe he was putting his energy into these young ladies so that he can get their story and put it all into a movie. It just so happened it wasn't just her story. It might have closely resembled it, but it wasn't just her story.
And I think when you're looking at that, you get where people oftentimes, when you really look at relationships, most people go into a relationship seeing what they can get out of it. And sometimes, you know what I'm saying, it's your own satisfaction you get from it. Like, some people thrives on being able to help people, not because they want to help people, but because how it makes them feel. You know what I'm saying? What it does for them, it gives them that instant gratification. And so he, you know what I'm saying, again, he talks about, her vulnerable states of, taking her to rehab and really think. But I think also he expresses a lot of the pain that he encountered during that time frame as well. And oftentimes I think that's something we got to think about in relationships too. When you're only looking at it from one side of the mirror, you forget the pain that's projected in that experience. Mm-hmm. So even when you're dealing with a person that may be experiencing addiction, or a person that may be experiencing mental illness, or a person that may be experiencing loss, or whatever, grief, or whatever they're encountering, you cannot just minimize it to just your side, because what happens is I discredit the experience. Like, I'm going through this, but I'm not going through it by myself. So if I'm not myself, the people around me are just as much impacted by whatever I'm experiencing. And so although she's seen it as, her struggle, he also got his own perspective of how he's seeing how things were transpiring. And then too, he brings in about her, infidelity or whatever the case may be when she stepped out on the relationship. So looking at it at that component, and when you're thinking about men and how they communicate, to me, he was expressing pain in that moment, but it's the way in which he did it. You know what I'm saying? It's so, he's saying a lot. They're saying so much in that movie. And that's what made me think about communication practices is we oftentimes say so much, but really if we're not listening, it's falling on deaf ears, right? And I think that's what you're pointing out, is that both of them were listening to respond, but nobody was actually listening to understand. And that's why I think I talk about that defense mechanism, is that when you start saying things that are tactful, when you start saying things that hit below the belt, like you said, that's when you're going to get people and put people in a defensive state, and nobody's listening anymore. And so when we're talking about communication and what that does, that's when it becomes toxic. Because now, even if what you're saying has value, I've already minimized it because this is how you made me feel, or this is what it done for me.
So what if there were, and Ty and D, if there was like some examples of healthy communication, because as we do therapy, sometimes we might pull a scene or we might pull a movie to show people, right? Is there anything in there that we can say was actually healthy? And if I had to say one, it would have been when he took his time away. And I believe she did too. They did both walk away from the argument at hand at different points.
I feel like there were a few positive or examples of healthy communication, in my opinion, throughout the movie. Even in the beginning, when he sensed body language that something was wrong, prior to him even disclosing that he'd already asked her at the movie premiere what was bothering you. And I think somewhere along the line, she pretty much indicated that tonight isn't the night, or she said, let's just talk tomorrow. Nothing productive is going to be said tonight. So in her defense, she was very assertive with indicating, hey, it may or may not be a problem, but tonight ain't the night to have this conversation.
Gotcha. Yeah.
He proceeds, now this is the negative. Well, no, we're going to stick with positive. So that was positive on her end. I do feel like they both did somewhat demonstrate reflective listening skills and assertive or active listening skills, because they did have open-ended questions. They did repeat things back to each other to try to get somewhat of some clarity, but I think it was more so in response to them wanting to kind of prove their side or whatever it is that they wanted to express. I think other examples of communication, like you said, healthy communications, throughout the movie, they both chose to walk away knowing that, all right, this is something problematic at the moment. Let me step away, decompress, breathe, think about what it is that I want to talk about. So I think that's pretty much about it when it comes to what I noticed in the movie that was somewhat healthy.
Yeah, and y'all said, I think both of y'all said reflective listening. They did do it. Like they did a good job of it.
Some parts of it.
Okay.
I think when you're looking at it, I think they do a good job also of processing. Now, some of the processing is when you take that time to go off to it. Like when he's walking down, when he takes the moment of outside and he kind of like fighting the air and all this stuff. Like he really is processing, I think, what she's saying. But again, it's the response. And this is kind of what, I have to utilize with my students, and when I'm communicating, your actions are critical. They're important. But they are just as important as your action is your response to it. So what do you do after that moment? So it's about the reflective part of it, but what did you do with that reflection? And I think that's where you transfer that to become more toxic, because you take the time and you reflect on what that person says, but again, you're in defense state, so everything they're saying is negative. You're not really listening to what they're saying. It goes into, well, you insulting me about my film or my career, like, oh, you trying to attack me, you trying to play me like I'm not good enough. And I think, again, both of them in that movie had some issues that they weren't discovering. And I think he kind of talks about his from a professional standpoint, even when he's kind of, talking about his role and what's expected of him as a producer and the quality of his work and things of that nature. I feel like he was really expressing his vulnerability in his profession as a career. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't come out and say it, but he was concerned about what the reviews were going to say. He was concerned about, how everybody was perceiving his work and how they, whether it was going to be classified as a masterpiece or not. And even when he got the information, it still wasn't good enough, right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, he was still looking for more. He was, excited about being compared to the greatest. But again, like, in that moment of excitement, she would immediately like shut him down. Like, come on, now you not no Spike Lee. Like, it's, what I'm saying, just a play in different things. And again, one of the other things of it is too, I think you have to look at just how quickly things would escalate from one perspective to another. And I think one of the challenges in their relationship, even when we're talking about switching it from the positive to the negative, because to me it was more negative than positive. So it's, that's just the reality of the film. But when you're looking at them and you see two people basically taking their own internalized issues and projecting it on someone else and expecting that to be where they find their relief at. And I think that's the challenge of communications and relationships, is that oftentimes we're dealing with our own issues. And so now when somebody else attacks that issue or brings that to surface, like, again, that hidden below the belt. Now it's time for me to go off on you. Like, you think you all this in a bag of chips, so let me expose your dark deep secrets, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's that again which makes that relationship and that communication that they presented in that film to be so toxic, from my perspective.
I think with when we don't become self-aware, when we don't aggressively go out there and try to figure out our thoughts, what we really feel, that's when you get what you were saying about you, that internalizing things and then projecting it onto the other person. And I talked about this earlier. Are there some things that's better left unsaid? But before we go to that, going back to what Ty was saying earlier about, she said nothing productive will end up happening tonight. That's key. That whole, everything could have been totally different had they waited that night to come and talk about it that next morning. Maybe one person or the other may not have been on the defensive. Just being on the defensive can change the whole dynamics of a disagreement. Because when you're on the defensive, sometimes you're going to say the first thing that comes to your mind, and that's not good.
And
But
I can see where you may say that they weren't demonstrating reflective listening skills, because if he would have really listened and heard her, he wouldn't have proceeded to have a conversation.
Exactly.
Would have continued to eat the macaroni and cheese in peace. All right, we can have this conversation tomorrow, because I don't think she left the door. She left the door open to say, yeah, we can build on this tomorrow, but tonight isn't a good night. So,
yeah.
in that aspect, yeah, I can see why ultimately you didn't see that there were any reflective skills going on or any active listening skills.
I'm not going to even
going
talk
on.
about that macaroni
But
and cheese.
I kind of disagree with it though,
Throughout the
because
movie.
she came back and said, when a person's telling you you're being an a-hole, you can't say that you're not. So like, again, like, you can't drop it and say that nothing's gonna be productive and then
Throw that out.
carry on. You know what I'm saying? So you kind of, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, okay, we done, but let me just add this piece in there. And then too, I think one of the challenges with Marie and what you may see in a lot of toxic relationships is Marie had multiple issues that she threw out all at one time. So first you were mad that he didn't acknowledge you. Then you said, well, you didn't want an apology, but the event was already past. So what else can he do other than apologize? So ultimately, then you go into, well, why didn't he cast you when you know what I'm saying? And then too,
he could have gotten better. He could have said, you know what, you're right. You're right. He could have said, you have a point. And I think at some point he did acknowledge that she had a point.
At the end.
But acknowledge it sooner. You got a point, and you know what, the next time, because there's going to be other premieres, there's going to be other times, he can make a commitment at that moment. You're right. Let me make a commitment not to do that again. Let me be a better person.
I think it's dangerous to project that on somebody though,
What you mean?
because you can't. If I am saying to you that this is not an issue, I then can't turn around and get mad because you don't understand that it is an issue. Like, and that's the issue with communication, because I'm saying one thing, and again, when we go back to when you're used to being with somebody, sometimes you get complacent in that. And she kind of talks about that. When you know that a person is there for you and you know that a person loves them, you don't really worry about them anymore until you're about to lose them. So again, when you're looking at how I'm communicating with you, how I'm talking to you, if I'm saying it ain't a big deal, and I keep asking you about it, you keep saying the same thing, how long am I supposed to continue to ask you? And then if you say it's not a big deal, but then you bring it back up, now I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the real issue? And he does that throughout the film, because he asks her, like, he eventually says that, so this is what this really was about. Yep. And I think that she tried to minimize it just about being the thank you, but it was always deeper than you wanted to actually be that film. And I think what the recognition that people were giving the person that he ended up casting in that position is what she wanted. So it wasn't just about the recognition from him. I think she wanted people to see her in that light, because she was no longer that struggling addiction that he found her in. And probably, I'm pretty sure people probably knew about her in that state. You guys know how it is in 2021 now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you had some issues, everybody know it. So now she's being seen as this glamorous person. You know, she could be somebody's model. She's not being seen as this helpless young girl that she was when she was in her early 20s. And so now, if people could really see that, you know, this is the recovery, this is what I have been through, this is not just another movie, this is not just another story, this is my life. And I think that's ultimately what she wanted. Is she wanted that recognition because she related and resonated with that character so much that that's who she wanted to be. But even he talks about, you know what I'm saying? And then too, she talks about how they had already had conversation about it. So I think it's just a lot of things, you know, when you're dealing with relationships and when you're dealing with communication, I think it signifies the importance of being direct with your communication. Like, a lot of people try to avoid conflict, but sometimes conflict is needed so that you can get to the core of what's really going on. While he could have been more direct and just saying, you know, I take responsibility that I didn't do that correctly, she could have acknowledged what it was that really was bothering her, and that was that she wasn't able to be in that role.
Speaking of direct, I think he was too direct. Going back to that question, are there some things better left unsaid? Yes.
Okay.
What? I don't understand how people can't see that. I shouldn't say I don't understand how people should, but still, there are some things that you can't tell everything. You can't say everything because those words have long-lasting effects. Mm-hmm. People don't always forget stuff. So from time to time, things that have happened that I've heard from 20 years ago may come up in my mind. Just because you heard it, it applies to you, it affected you negatively, and you try to improve on it. Or maybe you didn't try to improve on it, but in my case, you try to improve on it. Some things you just can't. It's for it to not be unsaid doesn't mean that you're not being honest, and I think that's the disconnect. People feel like if I don't say it, then I'm not being honest or I'm not being open. That's not necessarily correct. I totally disagree with that. If you're not saying it, you're just taking into account how it would affect the other person.
But is that a reflection of him or her? Because at the end of the movie, when you say some things are better not left said because a person may internalize it, and like you said, you may remember something that somebody said to you years ago, but is that a reflection of that person's statement or is that a reflection of you?
It's a reflection of both of them. It's definitely a reflection on him because if you are cognitive of, if I say this may hurt her because she's been through this trauma, and you still say it, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you're trying to hurt somebody that you love. As a man, you gonna do that?
I think that's why self-awareness is it's important. You mentioned that earlier, and even with communication, being able, as they demonstrated throughout the movie, let me take a moment and step back, retreat, rethink, but be careful how I respond. But if we're so caught up with wanting to respond quickly and not even hearing what the other person is saying, but hearing what we want to hear, and that goes back again to that listening component, it can be detrimental, to self and to the relationship. So really having that brutal, honest conversation with yourself first about whatever problem you're going to present to your partner, and sticking with one problem. I think I'm shifting here to how can we improve, wanting to have conversations that lead to conflicts. But you can have those dialogues in healthy ways. Yes. Sticking to one problem, checking yourself, having times outs, maybe having a timer if you two tend to interject and cut people off. Being mindful of what it is that I am going to say to this other person. And if it ain't kind, let me figure out maybe a different way to express it. Because going back to your statement, are some things better left unsaid? I'm kind of iffy with it, and this is just me. I feel like I always gotta say something, but what I mean by that is, though, I feel like I always gotta express how I feel, but I am learning expression comes in different ways, and is it even necessary in a sense? So, yeah, throughout the movie, I feel like the way they managed the conflicts by bringing up multiple problems was definitely unhealthy. Like you said, Dee, she went from not being recognized to then the casting part to then what your colleagues and other stars had to say about me. And I think that went back possibly to a lot of things that were either left unsaid or not dealt with in that moment. And then the dinner scene or the entire movie was everything that one had been harboring, to possibly avoid things. So
I love when you said that about the timer part, and this is why I like talking with y'all guys, because y'all we always bring out different points,
Yeah.
right? And that timer is, man, if they had to place themselves on a timer, then it doesn't escalate. You at least break it up, because oh man, I only got 10 minutes to get this out, and then y'all going back and forth. Maybe y'all divide it up 5 and 5, all right, but you only got so much time, so you can only say so much to make it worse. That timer is key.
I think so, but I think you also, even in that timer, you still have to be reflective, kind of like what Ty said about what you're going to say, because time doesn't mean that what you say won't be negative or won't escalate the situation. I think, kind of going back to what you said earlier when you talked about how things linger on, Marie says that in the end that she's going to internalize what he said for the rest of the time. Like, she told him basically that went too far, and she kind of said exactly what you said. Like that was she's basically told him he had already won the argument. And I think that's the dangers of communication, is when you're focusing on who's going to win this argument versus really looking at the issues and what's being stated. Like, are you truly understanding what this person is saying, and am I honestly communicating what's really bothering me? And I think that's one of the things, kind of like Ty said, moving into how do we improve these conversations, really identifying what are you trying to accomplish by this conversation, because what is this conversation meant to do? Is this conversation meant to really attack you as an individual, or is this conversation really meant to explore some of the things that's kind of bothering us, to kind of determine if we're going to continue in this relationship, or if we need to make modifications to this relationship, or is this just not a good relationship? And that's what you really have to look at and explore when you're dealing with people. Not this, oh, I won. You know what I'm saying? I hit you harder than you hit me, because it's not a boxing match. And I think that's what, society sees it as. When we start to yelling, when we start to screaming, when we go into a defense, that's really a fight. You know what I'm saying? When do you have to become defensive? When you in a fight, right? Mm-hmm. And communication should not be about fighting. It should really be about us learning to really engage in successful practices to where we can resolve conflict, because conflict is inevitable. Right. Anytime you have a relationship, whether it's work, whether it's partner, whether it's family, you're going to have some type of conflict. If you don't have conflict, you might want to check us out as a therapist, because that means you got a lot of internalization. But
I like what you were saying about just being accountable. Which goes into the I statements. Focusing on how you feel and what we're going to do about it, instead of just winning the argument.
Right.
How do I feel, and what am I going to do about it, or what are we going to do about it collectively? Because if you stick to one topic, then that's the end of it. Like, that's the end is a solution, whether that be a compromise or to give way. In Ty's instance, where she said she feel like she may have to say something, then that one person need to say, all right, both of us don't need to feel like we all got to say something. Somebody need to step. That could be a compromise within itself in the argument and going forward. As you learn each other, you learn what to do and what not to do going forward. But those I statements, I really love those I statements. Just focusing on how I feel, and then what am I going to do about it, or what are we going to do about it collectively.
And using healthy I statements, any I statement, I feel like it's healthy, opposed to you know, blaming. And I feel like they did a lot of that, somewhat of that, in the movie, opposed to, again, taking ownership for how they felt based off of the experience or the situation or the reaction of the other person that caused that emotion. And then with I statements, you clearly indicating what it is that you want moving forward, or what you may need. In that regard.
Any closing thoughts you have?
I think for me, it's about processing. I think it's always important to really take time to think. Get your thoughts together when you're dealing with communication, whether you're on the job, whether you're at school, wherever you are. Because I think sometimes when we just quickly respond, that's when things kind of get escalated even more. The processing component for me is always significant. And I think silence is important, but I think when you're using silence as a way to avoid really dealing with the issue at hand is when it becomes dangerous. So when, I kind of think about in general, like in an intimate relationship, and I can remember doing this even in my past, like somebody did something I ain't like, I'm just not gonna talk to you. You know what I'm saying? I'm just
stonewall.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm just gonna shut down. And now I'm, as I get older and as I learn that that's ineffective, right? Because things are still bothering me. And I think that's one of the challenges I have now with people is sometimes people don't address issues, and we kind of just move on like it didn't happen. But that's still an emotion that's still boggling up. And I always say, anytime you internalize something, at some point there's gonna be a tipper. At some point your lid is coming off. And so be attentive to, really vocalizing what you're experiencing. I'm with Ty when she say, I got to put it out there because I just can't remember what it felt like when I didn't put that emotion out there. But I think it is, important to always do that in an effective way. Being mindful of, that partner. When you know the person that you're communicating with, it's important that you recognize how that communication affects and impacts them. And take in consideration, like you said, sometimes those words will linger past that conflict. So can you live with it? Can you live with the statements that you're making past the moment of what you're doing and saying right now? It's not about just winning the argument. It's deeper than that.
Yeah, it's way. You took the words out of my mouth. It's deeper than that. It's bigger than winning that argument,
right.
because both of you guys gotta live going forward.
Right.
And those words linger. Those thoughts linger. And then you said something about, I think you said career or the job or something to that extent. When we're talking communication, it goes beyond just relationships. The things that we talked about today, in all actuality, you can put into play at work. But maybe we need to come back with a whole nother episode talking about that, just how to deal with it in your career.
Right.
Maybe even amongst your friends or just networking in general. But you can basically use the same things. It's just in a different context to some degree. So I think we beat that one down. We covered a lot of good stuff. I'm your host, Curvin. One of your hosts, Curvin, D, Ty. We're all on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Speaking with Gravity is on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not going to give their personal ID out because I don't want y'all sliding into their DMs or not like that. You can slide in mine. You can definitely slide in mine. I know how to handle you if you slide in mine. If I said something or if we said something to make you think you can use therapy or seek professional help, again, find us on those social media sites. Speaking with Gravity would be the tag that comes with it. Just find us, just put that in and search it, and it'll come up. And we'll try to point you in the right direction. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time out over the last 40-something minutes to hear what we got to say about communication. You could be doing anything else. You could be listening to anybody else, but you chose to listen to us, and we appreciate that. Thank you to Winnie Production. I think, I mess that up every time. I'm going to put something down right here so I can say it correctly. But thank y'all again for the time, and thank you for all of those that support us. Remember, we are therapists, but this ain't therapy. It's a podcast.